After aging out of the system at 18, a young man with nothing but a key inherits a derelict farmhouse. But what he finds inside isn't just a home, it's the truth about the mother who abandoned him. If you've ever felt lost, or like you had to start over from nothing, and let's walk this path together. The bus shuddered, its brakes hissing a long, weary sigh as it pulled away from the curb. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, watching the city shrink behind me. Each skyscraper, each familiar line of graffiti, each traffic light was another link in a chain being unspooled, leaving me drifting into an unknown gray expanse. For 18 years, that city had been my entire world, a world of group homes, caseworkers, and the constant low-level hum of not belonging anywhere. 2 days ago, on my 18th birthday, that world had officially ejected me. They called it aging out. It felt more like being unplugged. In my pocket, my fingers traced the sharp, unfamiliar edges of a single, old-fashioned brass key. It felt too heavy, too real for the life I'd lived so far, a life of temporary rooms and borrowed things. My entire worldly possessions were in a worn black duffel bag on the seat beside me. 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a dog-eared paperback, and an envelope containing $412, the last of the state's parting gift. And the key. The key had been given to me by Ms. Albright, my final caseworker. She was a woman who seemed permanently braced against a strong wind, her shoulders tight, her smile a thin, professional line. We sat in her beige office, a room that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The clock on the wall ticked with an aggressive finality. "Leo," she'd said, sliding the key across her metal desk. It skittered to a stop just before the edge. "This is for you." I'd stared at it, thinking it was a joke. A locker key? A post office box? "It's to a house," she continued, her voice even, betraying nothing. "Your mother's house. Or it was." My mother. The 2 words hung in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam, an idea I could see but never touch. My file was thin on the subject. Sarah Hale. Age at my birth, 19. Status, whereabouts unknown. Abandoned at 6 months old. That was the official story, the story that had defined me. "She left it to you, in her will." A will? People like me, people like the phantom idea of my mother, we didn't have wills. We had debts and regrets. "The property is in a town called Northwood. It's rural." That was an understatement I was coming to find. The bus had been driving for 3 hours, and the scenery had slowly bled from concrete and steel to skeletal trees and vast, empty fields sleeping under a blanket of frost. "The taxes are paid up for the next 6 months. After that, it's on you. You can sell it, I suppose. A developer has a standing offer on the land, or you can live there." She handed me a second envelope, this one thicker. It contained a deed, a map, and a single sheet of paper with a phone number for a lawyer and another for the development company. A sterile-looking logo at the top, Pioneer Holdings. Ms. Albright had looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in the 2 years I'd been on her caseload. The professional mask slipped for just a second. "I don't know what you'll find there, Leo. The place has been empty for over a decade. But it's yours. It's a start. A start. Or an end." As the bus rumbled on, I wasn't sure which. The city was a place I knew how to survive. I knew the rhythms of the shelters, the quickest way to get across town on foot, the faces of the other kids who, like me, were ghosts in the system. Out here, under this vast, indifferent sky, I was completely, terrifyingly alone. What kind of mother leaves her son a crumbling house in the middle of nowhere? What kind of person just disappears and leaves behind a key? The questions circled in my mind, a flock of vultures waiting for me to finally lie down. I clutched the key in my pocket. It was the only solid thing in my universe, a piece of a puzzle I never knew existed, a puzzle whose picture was a complete mystery. The bus driver's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the next stop. Northwood, 5 minutes. My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. I pulled my bag onto my lap, took a deep breath that did nothing to calm me, and waited. The bus was stopping. My life was, for better or worse, starting. The air that hit me when the bus doors folded open was a physical shock. It was sharp and clean, smelling of wet dirt and wood smoke, a scent so different from the city's perpetual exhaust fumes that it felt like I'd stepped onto another planet. The bus pulled away with another sigh, leaving me standing alone by the side of a 2-lane road. Across the street was a small, unassuming building with a single gas pump out front and a sign that read, Northwood General Store. That was it. That was the town. A few houses were visible down the road, their windows dark. The silence was the next thing I noticed. It wasn't just quiet. It was a deep, profound absence of noise that pressed in on my ears. In the city, there was always a hum, a siren, a distant shout. Here, the only sound was the wind rustling through the bare branches of the trees that lined the road. It was a lonely sound. I slung my duffel bag over my shoulder and crossed the empty street, the bell above the store's door chiming weakly as I entered. Inside, it was warm and smelled of coffee and sawdust. A woman with tired eyes and graying hair tied back in a messy bun looked up from behind the counter where she was stocking cigarettes. She gave me a look that was part curiosity, part suspicion. It was a look I was used to. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat. "I'm looking for a place," I said, my own voice sounding small in the quiet store. "The old Hale property." The woman's hands stilled, her eyes narrowed, the curiosity winning out over the suspicion. "The Hale place? Nobody's been out there in years. Not since Sarah—" She trailed off, glancing away as if the name itself was a memory she'd rather not disturb. "You family?" I hesitated. Was I? "Something like that," I mumbled. "It's mine now." This seemed to surprise her. She studied my face for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. Recognition? Pity? "Well," she said finally, turning back to her cigarettes. "It's a long walk, about 2 miles north of town. Just stay on this road. Pavement turns to gravel. You can't miss it. Big white farmhouse with a red barn. Or, they used to be white and red." She didn't offer any more information, and I didn't ask. The way she said my mother's name, Sarah, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just an abandoned property. It was a place with a story the locals knew and didn't seem eager to share with a stranger. I bought a bottle of water and a bag of chips, the most practical-looking things I could see. The transaction was silent. As I left, the bell chiming my exit, I felt her eyes on my back. The walk was just as she'd described, long. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the bruised purple clouds with strokes of pale orange and pink. The beauty of it felt alien, something I had no right to witness. My worn sneakers crunched on the asphalt, the rhythm of my own footsteps the only company I had. I passed a few more houses, set far back from the road, their lights beginning to flicker on, creating warm, isolated pools of life in the growing dusk. I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. It wasn't quite envy, more a deep, hollow ache of awareness. Those were homes. I was walking toward a property. There was a difference. The pavement gave way to a rutted gravel road, and the trees grew thicker, their branches interlocking overhead to form a dark tunnel. My cheap city jacket was no match for the damp cold that was seeping into my bones. Doubt began to creep in again, a familiar, unwelcome companion. This was a mistake. I should have taken the money from Ms. Albright's envelope, gotten a bus ticket to anywhere else, and disappeared. Starting over didn't have to mean walking into the heart of a past that had never wanted me. But my feet kept moving forward, one in front of the other, as if pulled by an invisible string. And then I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, perched on a slight rise, was the house. It stood silhouetted against the fading light, a skeletal shape that seemed to sag in on itself with a deep, weary exhaustion. The paint was peeling in long strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. The porch roof dipped precariously at one corner, and several windows were dark, gaping holes. The barn beside it was in even worse shape, its great doors hanging askew, and a section of its roof caved in. It didn't look like a start. It looked like the end of something, a place where hope had come to die. A rusted metal gate, tangled with weeds, blocked the entrance to the driveway. I pushed it open, its hinges screaming in protest. The sound echoed in the profound silence, an intrusion. I walked up the cracked dirt driveway, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. This was it, the legacy of Sarah Hale. I stood on the warped wooden planks of the porch, looking at the front door. The paint was faded, but I could just make out the shape of a hand-painted wreath of flowers, a ghostly welcome from a long dead summer. My hand was shaking as I pulled the brass key from my pocket. It looked ancient, like it belonged to a castle, not this sad, forgotten house. I slid it into the lock. It resisted, gritty with rust and disuse. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't turn, that this was the final sign, the universe telling me to turn back. I put my other hand on the door, leaned my weight into it, and turned the key with all my strength. There was a loud, grating click that seemed to echo through the entire structure. The lock had opened. I took a breath, turned the knob, and pushed the door inward. It swung open on a long, low groan, releasing a breath of cold, stale air that smelled of dust, decay, and time itself. I stood on the threshold, a ghost returning to a house of ghosts, and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the darkness. It was an absolute, suffocating black, thicker than any city night. The second was the smell. It was a complex scent, layered with the damp, earthy aroma of mildew, the dry, tickling scent of dust, and a faint, almost floral note, like potpourri that had surrendered its life years ago. I fumbled along the wall, my fingers brushing against a texture like peeling skin. Wallpaper. My hand found a light switch. I flicked it. Nothing. Of course, the power would have been cut off years ago. I pulled my phone from my pocket, its screen a startlingly bright rectangle in the oppressive dark. I turned on the flashlight, the thin beam cutting a nervous path through the gloom. I was standing in what looked like a foyer. To my left, a staircase ascended into shadows. In front of me was an archway leading into a living room. The furniture, a sofa, a few armchairs, a coffee table, was draped in white sheets, making them look like a gathering of silent, patient ghosts. The beam of my phone caught a million dancing dust particles, disturbed for the first time in what must have been a decade. I walked slowly, cautiously, into the living room, my footsteps echoing unnervously on the wooden floorboards. It felt like trespassing, like breaking into a tomb. Everything was preserved, but dead. I touched the sheet on the sofa, and a fine powder of dust plumed into the air. Underneath, the fabric was faded, but intact. On the mantelpiece, above a large stone fireplace, a collection of small glass animals stood in a neat row, their surfaces coated in a gray film. A family of deer, a bird with a broken wing, a tiny, perfect fox. Someone had placed them there with care. Someone had lived here. I moved through the ground floor like a detective at a cold case crime scene. The dining room had a large table and 6 chairs, all under sheets. The kitchen was a time capsule from another era, a yellowing refrigerator, a stove with rust spots blooming on its white enamel surface. I opened a cupboard, and the scent of dried herbs, rosemary and thyme, faintly lingered. I imagined a hand reaching for a jar, a meal being prepared, the sounds of a life being lived. It was an impossible image to reconcile with the profound silence that now owned this space. Every object I saw, every room I entered, felt like a question. Who chose this wallpaper? Who arranged those glass animals? Who left a half-empty jar of spices in the cupboard? Who was Sarah Hale? My exploration was methodical, driven by a strange mix of fear and a deeper, more urgent need to know. I was searching for something, though I didn't know what. A clue, a sign, an answer to the question that had shaped my entire existence. Why? Why leave me? Why disappear? Why this house? After I'd seen the ground floor, I turned my attention to the staircase. The steps groaned under my weight, each one a complaint against my intrusion. The air grew colder as I ascended. The upstairs hallway was a long, dark corridor with 4 doors leading off it. I opened the first. A bathroom. The mirror over the sink was clouded and spotted, reflecting back a distorted, shadowy version of my own face. The next 2 doors opened into empty bedrooms, completely bare. No furniture, no sheets, no ghosts, just 4 walls and a dusty floor. It was in the last room, at the very end of the hall, that I found it. This room wasn't empty. In the center of the floor was a simple wooden bed frame, stripped of any mattress. And at the foot of the frame sat a dark, heavy-looking wooden chest. It wasn't large, but it had an undeniable presence, a weight that seemed to anchor the entire house. It had iron clasps, rusted shut. My heart, which had been a low, nervous drum, began to beat faster. This was different. This wasn't just forgotten furniture. This was placed. This was left. I knelt on the dusty floorboards in front of it. There was no lock, just the 2 heavy clasps. My fingers were numb with cold and anticipation. I pried at the first one. It resisted, the rusted metal biting into my skin. I grunted with effort, pulling harder, and it finally sprang open with a loud snap. I did the same with the second. It gave way more easily. For a long moment, I just knelt there, my hands on the lid. Whatever was inside this chest was the reason Ms. Albright had given me the key. It was the reason I was here. It was the start of the answer. I took a shallow, shaky breath, and I lifted the lid. The air that rose from the chest was different from the rest of the house. It was the dry, papery scent of old books and ink. My phone's light fell inside, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't filled with money or jewels or any of the foolish, childish things I might have imagined. It was filled with notebooks, dozens of them. They were simple, spiral-bound notebooks, the kind you'd buy at a corner store, their covers faded to soft shades of blue, green, and yellow. They were stacked neatly, filling the chest almost to the brim. and resting right on top of the pile was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in elegant, looping cursive. Leo. It was the first time I had ever seen my name written by my mother's hand. It looked both alien and deeply familiar. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely pick it up. The paper was heavy, expensive feeling. I broke the wax seal, a simple, unadorned circle, and unfolded the letter within. It was several pages long, the same beautiful handwriting covering every inch of the paper. I angled my phone to get the best light, and I began to read. "My dearest Leo," it began. The words seemed to shimmer in the faint light. "If you are reading this, it means two things. It means you have turned 18, a man, and it means that I am gone. There are no words in any language to tell you how sorry I am. Sorry for not being there to watch you grow, to celebrate your birthdays, to patch up your scraped knees, to be your mother. Please, believe me when I say that not a single day has passed when my heart has not ached with the missing of you." I had to stop. I squeezed my eyes shut, a hot, angry pressure building behind them. It was too much, too soon. These were just words on a page, the excuses of a woman who had left me in a cardboard box on the steps of a hospital. I had lived my whole life with the story of my abandonment. It was a hard, cold fact, the bedrock of my identity. This letter, with its gentle words and flowing script, was trying to chip away at that foundation, and I wasn't sure I could stand if it crumbled. I forced myself to keep reading. "I know you must hate me," the letter continued. "You have every right to. I cannot ask for your forgiveness, only for your understanding. I didn't abandon you, my love. I protected you, the only way I knew how. This house, this land, it's your birthright. But it came with a danger I couldn't let touch you. In these notebooks you will find my story, our story. It is the only thing I have to give you besides this house. It is the truth. I need you to read them. I need you to know who you are and where you come from. But I must warn you, the truth is a heavy thing, and the danger that I ran from may not be gone forever. There are people who believe this land belongs to them, people who will do anything to get it. The standing offer from Pioneer Holdings, the one the state will have told you about, it is not an offer. It is a threat that has been waiting for you to come of age. They are patient. They are ruthless. They took your father from me, and I would not let them take you. Read the diaries, Leo. Start from the beginning. The answers are there. The choice of what to do next will be yours and yours alone. Whatever you choose, know this. I have loved you every second of every day. You were not a mistake. You were my everything." The letter ended with a simple, heartbreaking sign-off. "Your mother, Sarah." I let the pages fall from my fingers. They fluttered to the dusty floor. My mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Anger warred with a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight in my chest. Hope, a fragile, tentative thing, flickered against the cold wind of a lifetime of resentment. Protected me? What did that mean? Pioneer Holdings, the name from the lawyer's letter. My father? She mentioned a father. I had never even considered one. I was a product of the state, a file in a cabinet. The idea of having two parents, a history, a story, it was overwhelming. I looked from the letter to the chest full of notebooks. A life, documented. A truth, waiting to be unearthed. I could close the chest. I could walk out of this house, leave the key on the table, take the $400 and the bus to anywhere, and never look back. I could sell the land to this pioneer company and take their money. That would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. It would be an escape. But something held me there, kneeling on the cold floor of that empty room. It was the way she wrote my name. It was the desperate plea in her words. It was the sudden, shocking realization that my entire life had been a lie. Not a malicious lie, perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. The story of the unloved, abandoned boy was just that, a story. And here, in this chest, was the real one. Have you ever been handed a truth so heavy you didn't know if you could carry it? A moment that redefines everything you thought you knew about yourself, about your past. I sat there on that floor, in the deepening cold of that forgotten house, and I felt completely, utterly broken. The boy who had walked in that door an hour ago was gone, and I didn't know who this new person was. This person with a mother who loved him, a house, a history. If you're going through something right now that feels impossible, something that's shaking the very foundations of who you are, I want you to know that you are not alone. Let me know to build a new future. I read every single one, because we're a community here, built on the understanding that sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that make us who we are. I stayed there for what felt like hours, the beam of my phone's flashlight growing weaker. The cold was a deep, aching thing now, but I barely noticed. My world had shrunk to this room, this chest, this choice. To know or not to know. To accept the burden of her story, or to walk away and create my own from scratch. In the end, it wasn't much of a choice at all. How could I walk away? How could I live the rest of my life wondering? I reached into the chest and took out the first notebook. It was blue, its cover soft with age. The first page was dated 20 years ago, a year before I was born. My mother would have been 18, my age. With a trembling hand, I opened the cover. The same looping cursive filled the page. September 4th, it began. Moved into the farmhouse today. It's perfect. It's mine. I settled back against the wall, pulled my jacket tighter around me, angled the weak light of my phone onto the page, and I began to read my mother's life. The first diary was full of hope. It was the story of a young woman, Sarah, who had just inherited the farm from her own grandmother. She wrote about her dreams for the place. She wanted to restore the barn, plant an apple orchard, fill the fields with wildflowers. Her words painted a picture of a house that was not derelict and sad, but vibrant and full of life. She described the way the morning sun filled the kitchen, the sound of rain on the tin roof, the smell of the lilacs that grew by the porch. She was a talented writer, her descriptions so vivid I could almost see the house as she saw it, could almost feel the warmth she felt for it. This wasn't just property to her. It was a living thing, a part of her soul. She was happy. She was free. I read about her trips to town, her friendships with some of the locals, the small joys of her solitary life. I felt a strange sense of jealousy, not just for her happiness, but for her certainty. She knew where she belonged. Then, about halfway through the first notebook, a new name appeared, Daniel. She met him at the town's small fall festival. She described him as charming, handsome, with eyes that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. He was a little older, not from Northwood, but working a construction job nearby. He swept her off her feet. The tone of the diary shifted. The entries became longer, more breathless. They were filled with him. Daniel this, Daniel that. He loved the farm as much as she did, she wrote. He talked about helping her fix the roof, about building a future there with her. They fell in love, fast and hard, under the wide open country sky. I read about their first kiss by the creek that ran behind the property, their long walks through the woods, their plans, It was a perfect love story, but as I read, a cold feeling of dread began to settle in my stomach. I knew how this had to end. I was the evidence of it. My father. This had to be my father. The second notebook began with a joyful announcement. She was pregnant. She was terrified and ecstatic. Daniel was overjoyed, she wrote. He promised to be there for her, for the baby, for me. They were going to be a family. But it was here that the first cracks began to appear in the idyllic picture she had painted. Daniel started staying out late. He was cagey about where he went, who he was with. There were hushed phone calls he would take out in the barn. When she asked, he would get angry, defensive, before turning on the charm again, telling her she was imagining things, that he was just stressed about money. Money. The word appeared more and more frequently. He'd lost a job. He owed someone. He just needed a small loan. She gave him money from her savings, the money her grandmother had left her. It was never enough. The entries became shorter, more worried. The beautiful looping cursive grew tighter, more jagged. The joy was leaching out of the pages, replaced by a creeping, pervasive fear. Then came the first mention of Pioneer Holdings. It was subtle at first. A letter in the mail, an unsolicited offer to buy the farm. She threw it out, annoyed. Then another came, the offer higher. Then a man in a suit showed up at the door, unannounced. He was polite, but there was a coldness in his eyes. He told her the company was acquiring land in the area for a new resort development. He said her farm was key to their plans. He named a price that was staggering. She told him no. The farm wasn't for sale. It was her home. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything is for sale, Ms. Hale," he'd said before leaving. "It's just a matter of finding the right price." After he left, she confronted Daniel. She had a sick feeling, a suspicion connecting his money problems to this sudden, aggressive interest in her land. He confessed. He wasn't a construction worker. He was involved with the people behind Pioneer Holdings. They weren't just developers. They were criminals who used predatory loans and intimidation to force people off their land. Daniel was one of their agents, sent to get close to her, to convince her to sell. But he swore he had really fallen in love with her. He said he was trying to get out, but he owed them too much money. He was trapped. My hands were shaking as I read this. This man, my father, wasn't just a charming rogue. He was a predator. He had been sent to destroy my mother's life, and instead, he had started a new one with her. The story was so much uglier, so much more complicated than I could have imagined. The diary entries from that period were a blur of pain, betrayal, and terror. She wanted to believe him, to believe he loved her, that they could escape together. But the threats escalated. The polite man in the suit was replaced by men who were not polite. They parked their cars at the end of her driveway at night, their headlights cutting through her windows. They called her at all hours, their voices low and menacing. They told her Daniel's debt was now her debt. The farm was the collateral. I was born into this storm. My birth is recorded in a short, frantic entry. "Leo is here," she wrote. "He is perfect. He is the only perfect thing in this whole mess. I look at his face, and I know I will do anything, anything, to keep him safe." That was the turning point. The diaries after my birth were no longer the chronicle of a life. They were a record of a war. A desperate, lonely war, fought by a terrified young mother. She documented every threat, every phone call, every strange car. She started collecting evidence. She wrote down license plate numbers, recorded conversations, made copies of every threatening letter from Pioneer. She was building a case, hoping she could take it to the police. But Daniel told her it was useless. The company had people everywhere, in the local government, in law enforcement. No one would help her. They were completely alone. The final entries in the third notebook were the most harrowing. Daniel had disappeared. One night he went out for cigarettes and never came back. She didn't know if he had run or if they had taken him. She was alone with me, a baby, in a house that had become a prison. The threats became more direct. They mentioned me. They said it would be a shame if something happened to such a beautiful baby boy. That was her breaking point. I had to put the notebook down, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold in the room was nothing compared to the ice in my veins. This wasn't a story about abandonment. This was a story about a mother lioness protecting her cub from a pack of hyenas. She hadn't thrown me away. She had hidden me. The system, the foster homes, the years of feeling unwanted, it had all been a shield. A painful, lonely shield, but a shield nonetheless. She had sacrificed her own life with me to give me a life at all. I cried then. Not quiet, self-pitying tears, but huge, racking sobs that tore through my body. I cried for the baby who was taken from his mother. I cried for the young boy who spent years staring out of windows, waiting for a car that would never arrive. And for the first time, I cried for her. For the 19-year-old girl whose dream had turned into a nightmare. For the mother who had to make an impossible choice. I cried for her loneliness, for her fear, for the love that had forced her to commit the ultimate act of self-destruction. I cried until I was empty, until all that was left was a hollow, echoing space in my chest, where a lifetime of anger and resentment used to be. The first rays of a weak, watery dawn were filtering through the grimy windows when I finally picked up the last notebook. My phone had died hours ago. I was reading by the faint gray light of the new day. This diary was different. The entries were sporadic, dated over years. They were written from different places. A motel in a different state. A rented room in a city I'd never heard of. She had been on the run. She wrote about the series of dead-end jobs she worked. Waitress, cleaner, factory worker, saving every penny she could. She described following my life from a distance, through a private investigator she paid with her meager savings. She knew which foster home I was in. She had a grainy photograph of me at age 10, playing soccer. The pain in her writing was a raw, open wound, but underneath the pain, there was a fierce, unyielding resolve. She was not just running, she was planning. In the final pages, written only 6 months before my 18th birthday, she laid out her plan. She had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. She was out of time. But she had accomplished what she set out to do. She had saved money, a lot of it. "It's hidden in the barn," she wrote, her handwriting shakier now but still clear. "Under the 3rd floorboard from the west wall, right where we used to keep the milking stool. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough for a choice." The choice. She laid it out for me with devastating clarity. I could take the money and run. Disappear, just like she did. Start a new life somewhere far away from Northwood and Pioneer Holdings. Or I could stay. I could use the money to pay the back taxes, to hire a lawyer, to fight. She had included the evidence she had collected all those years ago. The recordings, the letters, the photographs, in a sealed package at the bottom of the chest. "The evidence might be old," she wrote, "but the truth doesn't expire. Their greed won't have expired either. They will come for the land. The choice is yours, Leo. The life of a ghost, safe and anonymous, or the life of a homeowner, a fighter. Your father, he chose to run. I chose to fight, in my own way. I don't know which choice is right. I only know that I love you, and I want you to be free. This house was my dream. Maybe it can be your future. Or maybe It's just a cage. You have to decide." The sun was fully up now, filling the room with a pale, unforgiving light. The dust motes danced in its beams. I closed the final notebook. My hands were steady now. The storm inside me had passed, leaving behind a strange, quiet calm. The questions that had haunted my life had been answered. I knew who I was. I was the son of Sarah Hale, a woman of incredible courage. I was the heir to a dream and the target of a conspiracy. I looked around the dusty room, at the peeling wallpaper and the bare floor. It didn't look like a tomb anymore. It looked like a battlefield. And the battle wasn't over. I stood up, my legs stiff and sore from sitting on the floor all night. I walked to the window and looked out. The morning mist was burning off the fields, revealing a landscape of rolling hills and stark, beautiful trees. It was my land, my home. My mother had given me more than a house and some money. She had given me a purpose. The choice she had laid before me, the choice between running and fighting, wasn't a choice at all. How could I take her sacrifice, her years of suffering and loneliness, and just run? How could I let Pioneer Holdings win? They had taken my father. They had taken my mother. They would not take this from me too. I would not be a ghost. I would be a homeowner. I would be a fighter. I would stay. My first move was to find the money. I went downstairs and out the back door, into the crisp morning air. The barn was even more dilapidated up close than it looked from the house. But it was sturdy, its massive beams holding strong. Inside, it smelled of hay and earth and time. Light streamed through the gaps in the roof, illuminating the cavernous space. I found the west wall and counted the floorboards. 1, 2, 3. The third board was slightly loose. I knelt down and worked my fingers into the crack, prying it up. It came away with a groan of old nails. And there, nestled in the dark, rich earth below, was a metal box. It was heavy. I lifted it out and carried it back to the house, setting it on the dusty kitchen table. It was an old Army surplus ammo can, painted black. It was locked with a simple padlock. I didn't have a key for this one. I searched the kitchen drawers and found an old, rusty screwdriver. I wedged it into the lock mechanism and twisted. The metal shrieked, but it held. I put all my weight into it, grunting with the effort, and with a final loud crack, the lock broke. I opened the can. I stared. It was full of cash. Bundles of 20s, 50s, and 100s wrapped in rubber bands. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was a physical manifestation of my mother's love, her sacrifice. Years of lonely nights and back-breaking work, all for this, all for me. At the bottom of the ammo can, under the last of the money, was the sealed package she had mentioned. It was a large manila envelope, bulging with its contents. I didn't open it. Not yet. That was for the lawyer. I sat down at the kitchen table, the money and the evidence in front of me, and I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of it all. It wasn't just a house. It was a legacy. It wasn't just money. It was a weapon. I thought about Ms. Albright, her pragmatic face, the flicker of something more in her eyes. She had given me a number for a lawyer. It was time to make the call. But my phone was dead. I looked around the kitchen. On the wall was an old, yellowed rotary phone, a relic. I picked it up. There was no dial tone. The line was dead. Of course. I had to walk back to town. I left the money and the evidence hidden back in their place under the barn floor. A secret between me and my mother's ghost. The walk back felt different. I wasn't a lost boy anymore. I was a man with a mission, The air felt cleaner, the sky bigger. When I walked into the general store, the same woman was behind the counter. She gave me the same suspicious look, but this time I met her gaze. "Is there a payphone around here?" I asked. She gestured with her thumb towards the corner of the store. "Takes quarters," she said. I dug through my pocket and found the change I had left. I dialed the number for the lawyer, a Mr. Peterson, from the sheet Mrs. Albright had given me. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. I explained who I was, my voice steady. I told him I was the son of Sarah Hale, the new owner of the Hale farm. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The Hale farm," he said slowly. "Yes, I'm familiar with the property, and with Pioneer Holdings. I was sorry to hear about your mother's passing. She contacted me a few times over the years. A very determined woman." My heart leaped. She had a lawyer. She had been setting this up for years. "I need to see you," I said. "I have things, evidence, and I want to fight them." Another pause. Then, "I can be in Northwood tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Meet me at the diner on the main street." I spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity. I bought cleaning supplies at the general store, buckets, sponges, trash bags, a broom. The woman at the counter, whose name I learned was Martha, seemed to thaw slightly. "Fixin' the place up?" she asked, a genuine note of curiosity in her voice this time. "I'm going to try," I said. When I paid, she pushed a small bag of apples across the counter. "On the house," she said. "Welcome to Northwood, for real this time." It was a small gesture, but it felt huge. It felt like the first thread of a new community being woven around me. Back at the house, I started to clean. I threw open the windows, letting the cold, fresh air chase out the stale smell of decay. I pulled the sheets off the furniture, sending great clouds of dust into the sunlit air. I swept the floors, scrubbed the kitchen counters, washed the grime from the windows. It was hard, physical work. My muscles ached. But with every swipe of the sponge, with every pile of dust I swept out the door, I felt like I was reclaiming the house not just from dirt and time, but from the darkness that had haunted it. I wasn't just cleaning a house. I was preparing for a siege. I was making my stand. That night, I didn't sleep in one of the empty rooms. I brought a blanket from the chest and slept on the sofa in the living room, in front of the cold fireplace. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was home. The legal battle was long and ugly, just as my mother had predicted. Mr. Peterson was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his late 60s, with a fierce sense of justice. When I showed him the evidence my mother had collected, his eyes lit up. The old recordings, the threatening letters, her meticulous notes. It was a treasure trove. Pioneer Holdings fought back, of course. They had high-priced lawyers who tried to drown us in paperwork. They argued the debts were legitimate, that my mother was unstable, that the evidence was inadmissible. But my mother's story, told through her diaries and her careful documentation, was powerful. Mr. Peterson used the money she had saved to hire forensic accountants and investigators. They uncovered a pattern of fraud and intimidation going back years, affecting dozens of families in the region. My case became the linchpin for a much larger class action lawsuit. It took over a year of depositions, court dates, and constant grinding pressure. There were days I wanted to give up, days the weight of it all felt too heavy. But every time I felt that way, I would walk through the farmhouse, touch the furniture she had chosen, look out at the fields she had loved, and I would find my strength again. I was not just fighting for myself, I was fighting for her. In the end, we won. Not just a victory, but a rout. The court ruled that the debt against the farm was fraudulent. The title was cleared, free and clear. It was mine. Pioneer Holdings was hit with massive fines and forced into a settlement for the other families they had targeted. Their predatory empire began to crumble. The day the final verdict came in, I didn't celebrate. I drove back from the city courthouse, and I walked out to the small, overgrown family cemetery at the edge of the property, a place I had discovered months earlier. There was a headstone for my great-grandmother and an empty plot beside it. I stood there for a long time, the legal papers in my hand. "We did it, Mom," I said, the words carried away by the wind. "We won." A profound peace settled over me. The war was over. It's been 2 years since that day. The house looks different now. I used the last of the money and a small loan secured by the now valuable land to fix the roof and the porch. I painted the house, not white, but a soft, warm yellow. The barn has a new roof, and the great doors are fixed and painted a deep, classic red. I haven't planted an orchard yet, but I cleared the fields. This spring I'm planting wildflowers, just like she wanted to. The inside of the house is clean and warm. I have electricity and running water. The furniture is no longer covered in sheets. The glass animals on the mantelpiece are clean and catch the light. It's not a showpiece. It's a home. Lived in. A little messy. Mine. I've gotten to know the people in town. Martha from the store brings me a pie every now and then. A few of the other families from the lawsuit, people whose homes were saved because of my mother's fight, come by for dinner sometimes. We're a strange, cobbled-together family, bound by a shared history of struggle and survival. I'm not alone anymore. Her diaries sit on a shelf in the living room. I read them sometimes, not for the story of the fight, but for the story of her life. I read about her love for this land, her hopes, her dreams. I'm trying to live them for her. The house is quiet, but it's not empty. It's filled with her memory, with her courage, with the echoes of her impossible love. She taught me that inheritance isn't about money or property. It's about the story we choose to carry. She gave me back my past, and in doing so, she gave me a future. My mother's story taught me that home isn't just a place you live. It's a choice you make. It's the story you decide to honor. It's the fight you decide to finish. What does home mean to you? What stories do you carry? I'll be reading them. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and the power, there are so many more stories to tell, and I'm so glad